Hello, my name is Tom Masano, and I am a systems engineer with Dell Technologies, specifically in the UDS or Unstructured Data Solutions Group. Today is July 8th, 2021, and I'm going to be demonstrating to you the Isilon cluster. Now, if you look here, I have 3 VMs that are the Isilon nodes, and you can download this image directly from the Dell Technologies site. Now you can install just one node with the simulator, or as I chose, you can do multiple nodes. I chose 3 because if this was a production system, we would have a minimum of 3 nodes. Now you also notice that I named the nodes Isilon nodes, but yet it's in a PowerScale folder. Isilon is more of the legacy nomenclature for the scale-out NAS, and keeping with the Dell Power branding, it is going to start moving to PowerScale. So unfortunately, you may hear people use them interchangeably, a PowerScale cluster or an Isilon cluster. They mean the same things, okay? So let's log into the cluster. So now as you log in, you see that I am logged in as admin. Also, I can see the cluster name up here. It is PowerScale 1. It shows me the version 9.1.0, and I am connected to node 2. Now I can hover over the little I and it'll give me more detailed information about the version that I am currently on. Now when we first come in, it brings us to the cluster status dashboard, and you'll see that there are no events that are being called out in the cluster. But as I scroll down, you can see that there are 3 nodes here and they are all healthy, which is goodness. And I keep scrolling down and we get some more information: throughput and CPU usage, and active client connections. In the upper right hand side, we'll also see the cluster size. We'll see the amount of capacity that we have here, 167 gigabytes. VHS is a virtual hot spare. Think of this as reserve space. So if there is a failure of a drive and we need to rebuild, we still have some work area here dedicated for virtual hot spares. This will change depending on the amount of capacity you have and the type of hardware. And then I can keep scrolling down, and we can see some more information about the storage efficiencies, physical and logical usage. Now, I can also go to the top and look at node status, and since I'm on node 2, it's giving me information specifically about node 2. So again, we can look down here, look at our interfaces, and we see our public interface and our internal interface, which is the back-end Ethernet network where the nodes communicate to each other. Now, if I wanted to look at a different node, I could go back to cluster status, pick the node I want to go to, and now I switch, and I'm currently looking at node 1. And then I see the same information here. Okay. Now what you're going to notice in the menu at the top is it kind of starts from a low level cluster management and it builds up to from the file system to data protection, access, and ultimately protocols. So I almost see this as a workflow. So I'm going to work from my left to my right as we go through some of these menus. So I can click on General Settings. And in here, we can see I can rename the cluster if I wanted to. I can create a description, change login messages, add all different types of contact information. I can also start to set up email settings. So I can set up an SMTP host where I'm going to send event in notifications to. And here we can look at the node date and time, and I can see down at the bottom, I can set this up, but currently I did set up previously NTP, so I can put in an NTP, fully qualified domain name here, and add it as an NTP server. Now the number of servers that are participating using that NTP server are 3 of them. So number of nodes that chime simply means that these nodes are going out to the pool ntp.org server. If you wanted to exclude specific nodes not to go out and get that information, you could add them down here. We also have Snmp Monitoring, so you can also click here and download the MIB if you wanted to for your Snmp system. And the same thing with the trap. You can click here, download the trap, and there is also remote support. So this is kind of the phone home system. So this would typically require a secure remote support server or application running on a server. Right now I don't have that set up, but this is where you would set that up also. Going back up to cluster management, I'll go to the next item, which is automatic replacement recognition. By default, this is on, and this simply means that if a drive fails and you happen to plug a new drive in, it will automatically start to recover that drive. We can go to events and alerts, and we can see that there are no group events here. We can also look at alerts, and we can see what different types of alerts that we can set up. We also have alert channels, which are configurable for you, and we can send a test alert. And then there are also settings for the events and thresholds. So we can edit these thresholds if we wanted to over here. Going back to the top, looking at network configuration. Now we can go in here and look at the interfaces. So I can see subnet 0, pool 0. These are the IP ranges for the cluster, the lowest node being 10, the highest being number 12. And then I can also look at the internal network or the back-end network. And I happen to use a 10.10 addressing scheme for that. If you wanted to clear the DNS cache, you could do that here. You could also set the DNS cache. And then there are settings in here for rebalancing the IPs. And this is used for Smart Connect. Currently, I do not have Smart Connect configured for this, but we can come back to this once we do configure it. We can look at hardware configuration. So it's showing us each one of the nodes and what their configuration is, the type of chassis, if you will. If we had different types of nodes, Isilon supports many different types of nodes, from Flash or NVMe to regular SAS to an archiving deep storage type. So many different types of nodes can be part of the cluster. If we go to drives, we can actually look at the drives in this node, right, and see the status of those. And then we can also look and manage the cluster. So if we wanted to shut the cluster down, we could do it here. We could also reboot the cluster. Looking at job operations, we can see there are currently no jobs running, but then we can also look at a job type. So these are the different job types that are available: their state, their priority, their impact, and their schedule. Some have an actual schedule by default, some do not. I could kick off this job manually if I wanted to, or I could go in and edit it if I wanted to. So I can go here, edit, and now I can say change the priority, change the impact, and I can schedule it. There are also job reports. I did run some jobs previously, so we can see that there are job reports here and the phase that those reports are in. So the worm queue happens to have 2 phases, so it did have both of those. I can look at the details of those, and we can see that it was a smart lock scan, and we can look at the second one and see the configuration history deleted the scan completely. Now I can also go to job events. So if a job did run, we can see where it is here, the state change, and it did succeed. So we can see that all of these succeeded here. And we can change, when we had the high, low, medium, the impact policies, we can also change what the impact schedule is and the details. Going back to the top, we can go to auditing, and we can enable auditing, and we could add zones. As I said, we can have multiple nodes in here, so we can add specific nodes to specific zones and enable it at that granular level. We can turn on diagnostics, which is called gather. This is if you're going to support, you could start a gather. So we can say start, and it'll give you some options on how to do that, and it'll automatically upload it to support. We can change actually what the default is for the gather here. And then we also have NetLogger, which can collect network information in the same way that Gatherer collected hardware information. And we can set the settings on that also, looking at specific interfaces if we wanted to. We can also look at licensing. So there are some alerts here that we probably don't have any licensing. I didn't turn any licensing on by default when I installed this cluster. So you can see here the license overview, everything is unlicensed, but we can go all the way down to the bottom and we can set up trials for all those licenses. So let's do that. We can manage our trials. We can turn all of them on and we could start the trials. Now, if we go back up to the top, we can see that all of these are in evaluation node. Now we can go to the health check and we can see what evaluations were done. And we can see that some did fail. They were running every day at 4 o'clock. These are scheduled. And we can click and see view details and it'll give us some information. Now, I didn't set up NFS or protection or sync IQ or any of these things. So of course, they're failing. We can also, there are some that did pass. They're down here. There are no details because it passed. We can also go to the health checks itself and get more information as to what it actually does. So we can see the auth health check does an auth provider status checks, and we can look at the details of that, and it'll give us, all the information of what entails doing that actual health check. We can also look at a latest evaluation. Now, since it passed, there was no evaluation, but if it's a fail, we'll see an evaluation. And we can see that the RPC service has not been registered. So we haven't, again, I haven't set any of this up yet, so that's why it's failing. And then there's the scheduler. So there is a default schedule. We can edit the schedule if you wanted to, add health checklists and delete them and set how often you want them to run and run at what time or multiple times during a day. You can also do an upgrade on the cluster. This can be done by the customer, but it can also be done by our service personnel. You would just upload the files that are required, and the cluster will do an upgrade. And also the same thing for patches and firmware. So you can see what patches and firmware is available here, and the cluster firmware also. So now we can get more into a higher level and get into storage pools. So storage pools we have here. We can see the local storage. I'm not consuming anything yet really because I haven't configured anything yet. It gives me a status of the policy smart pools and things. Again, nothing's configured. We can have policies here. I haven't created a policy. We'll come back and do that again, but we do have some templates that are available for us to use. And there are smart pools, which is tiering of data. So we can click on this pool and we can change some information about this to the protection level that we want to give this pool of drives. This is created during install. This is all the drives that are part of those nodes, those 3 nodes that I had here. Cloud pools is where we can externally push data up to a cloud provider, and it's very simple. You create a connection. You could tell it what type is the cloud. We can do Amazon S3, Microsoft Azure. So there are many different types that you can do. And then you would put the endpoint URI, the username key, and if you wanted to use certificates or not. Very simple to set up. And there are smart pools and there are settings that we can do on the smart pools. We can change the amount of virtual hot spares if we wanted to, or the percentage of storage as an example. And here we have cloud pools. We can encrypt the data before transfer, compress it. We can create a retention period. We can do the write frequency that we use to it, the accessibility, and so on. Smart quotas is also here, so we can set up smart quotas if we wanted to. So we could create a quota and it would be a directory quota. We could specify a path. Again, since I don't have it set up right now, we can't go back to that. And we can generate reports from the smart quotas and have settings. There's also smart dedupe. It'll show us what the savings are currently for the smart dedupe. There's really no information on this yet except internal information. And then we also have some settings that we can put on the directories that we have within OneFS. There's also File System Explorer. So this is, truly OneFS. So the IFS is the root of the entire OneFS. So here we can actually browse it or we can create a directory. So I'm going to create a directory and I'm going to call it production and give it the default access. And under production, I'm going to create another directory called app team 1, team 2. So now I've created the beginning of actually getting ready to configure the system to put data on it. Now there is also smart lock where we can make it a worm domain. So we can create a domain if we wanted to and put what IFS path that we're going to use for that smart lock. And there is also file system settings. So we can edit access time tracking settings, which means that currently if you just touch a file, we don't update the file with the access time just because it's actually a write operation. So you're creating a write just by touching a file. So we feel from a performance perspective, that's not optimal, but you can turn that on, you enable access time tracking, and it'll change the access time every time the file is accessed. And then of course there's character encoding. There's data protection, so we can do snapshot IQ. We can create snapshots if we wanted to. We can schedule these snapshots, and we can look at the settings of all these snapshots. There's also sync IQ, which I currently don't have another cluster set up, so we can't show right now, but this is where you would do it. You could create policies on how you wanted to do it, generate a report, identify the local targets that you wanted to use performance rules. So we could limit by bandwidth, file count, CPU, worker threads, and so on. And then certificates if we're encrypting the link between the clusters, and then additional settings that we can do. It can also be configured for NDMP. So if you wanted to use NDMP to back it up, you could do that. You could set up the context that the NDMP uses, also devices. So if there was fiber channel ports on the cluster, you could attach fiber channel tape drives or a tape library to it, and you would manage all these through here. You can do the NDMP service, and there is also environmental settings that you could do, such as variables. And there's also antivirus, so we can generate a report on our antivirus. You can use Kava, which is the common antivirus agent solution, or if you have ICAP enabled antivirus, you can set it up here. So we can go to access zones. So you can create an access zone where you can limit from a network perspective access to specific parts of the file system. So we can create file filters and enable them so we can deny writes of certain extensions or allow writes for specific extensions. Maybe you don't want your users keeping movies or music files on it. You can deny writes from that. Authentication providers, we can add Active Directory. Very simple to do. We can also enable secure NFS. and take the rest defaults. And it was successful. There's also LDAP, NIS, local provider, file provider. You could do a Kerberos provider and then also do the Kerberos settings on that. Membership and roles, so we can add users here. Okay, so we can look at the groups. We look at the provider, Active Directory, the domain, and we get to see all of that. It is connected to Active Directory and we can see all the names. We can go to roles now, and these are the roles and what they do. You can view or edit these, but we're going to create a new role, and I'll call it domain admins. And I can add members, so I can add individual users or groups. So I'll use groups, select provider, the Active Directory domain, and we can search for that, and then I can pick domain admins. Scroll this down a little bit. Select that. So now we can see this, and now we can create the role. So now we can scroll down and we can see domain admins. Isilon also supports user mapping. Now we can go to the default access control list. There is much here. I'm not going to go into each one of these, but as you can see, there are many settings that you can change, but we're going to take all of the defaults. We can go to settings and change the on-disk entity or enable NTLM version 2. Now, as we're getting towards the end, we can create a Windows share. So now I can create an SMB share. I can give it a name. We'll call it apps1 and browse the path to what I showed, production and app team 1. Select that. And I can change some of the ACLs on this, but I'm going to take all the defaults. I'm going to give everyone read-only access to this. I can add members to this, so I can add a member name, just like we did previously. Find it and select it. And I want to give them full control. So there it is. So the security is in order from a top-down approach. And then once I get that done, I also have show advanced settings. So we can look at some additional many settings here that we can set up. I won't go into all these in detail, and click create to share. And we enable the SMB service, take the defaults, save changes, and let's see if we can see it out here. And now we see the apps1 folder here, and it's empty. Now it's just as easy to set up all these other. We can set up NFS, HDFS, FTP, HTTP, and also some limited S3. I hope you found this demo useful. Thank you.